This video is brought to you by Ugreen. With the latest M2 iPads and the release of iPad OS 16, I get a lot of questions about using the iPad in a desk setup. So in this guide, I'll try and help you determine if you should think in the direction of an iPad setup or keep using the tablet as your sidekick to your laptop. Let's begin with the basics. In order to connect an iPad to a monitor and take advantage of extended display and Stage Manager, you need to be using an M-powered iPad. The list includes all sizes that run the M1 and M2 chips, including the latest iPad Air with M1, which means that you won't be able to take advantage of faster speeds if you decide to connect an SSD to the monitor, for example. In my experiments, a 2.8GB video took about 1 minute 19 seconds to transfer via the monitor on the slower USB-C port and 45 seconds when plugged in directly to the iPad. In comparison, on the M2 with the faster Thunderbolt port, it took 5-ish seconds for the same file when plugged in directly or via the monitor. Negligible difference. In my case, I'm using the Apple Studio Display with an M2 iPad, which is pretty much the best case scenario. If you have a different monitor, you might need to think of an HDMI or DisplayPort cable to USB-C, or best case scenario, get a proper USB-C adapter like Ugreen's USB-C 7-in-1 multi-port adapter. It's a compact device that opens a world of connectivity options. It has a 4K HDMI port for your monitor, 2 USB 3.0 ports with up to 5 gigabits data transfer, and 1 TF and 1 SD slot for all sorts of SD needs. Having these ports is an absolute time saver to me when I'm transferring photos and videos from my camera. The adapter also has a PD port for 100-watt charging, which is greatly appreciated. Last but not least, if I want to plug in an Ethernet connection, there is a port for that too, with up to 1 gigabit per second, by the way. The aluminum case protects it and cools it down at the same time, and apart from your iPad, you can use it with your MacBook as well. Be sure to check out Ugreen's 7-in-1 USB-C adapter by following the first link in the description below. Now that the connection topic is settled, it's a matter of plugging in the iPad to the monitor. When you do that, there are a few things to consider. First is positioning the iPad relative to the display. If you use a magic keyboard or some sort of magnetic case that puts the tablet to sleep, you won't be able to summon it from the monitor. You need to keep it open. Unlike the MacBook, there's no clamshell mode, which means you're stuck with an iPad SBS setup, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but if you're not sure what SBS stands for, you can check out my dual monitor guide video, which I'll link at the end of this one. iPad SBS, or side-by-side, is keeping the iPad front and center below the monitor, either laying flat on the tabletop or on its keyboard stand that you use, or an iPad stand or a shelf like I do in my case. I know many would be interested in the setup, so I'll make sure to place links to this awesome below shelf and stand in the description below. Of course, you can keep it to the side, but if you have an iPad with Face ID, it will be a crime against humanity not to take advantage of it by keeping the tablet on the side and having to manually enter your password or projecting weird body language when wanting to authenticate something. Next up is going to display settings and adjusting the position of your iPad relative to your monitor so that you can scroll naturally between the displays. Unlike the Mac, you're not very flexible in choosing the iPad location and you're basically stuck with 4 positions. The top one seems very awkward to me, by the way. Now, if you don't see the option to extend your iPad to the monitor and you're stuck with mirroring mode, seeing the same thing on both the monitor and the iPad, then go to settings and check your iPad OS version. Apple turned off the extended display support in iPad 16.1, but it's there in version 16.2. If you don't have it officially yet, feel free to enroll in Apple's beta program and grab it from there. By the way, if you end up enjoying this video, subscribe, because why not? In terms of peripherals, you can use any Bluetooth mouse or keyboard, but there's a few caveats. If you decide to pair your Apple keyboard and mouse, which works best with the iPad, by the way, you won't be able to then use them with your Mac if you decide to quickly switch back and forth. You'll have to remove the Magic Keyboard and mouse from one device and pair it again with another. I think Apple should create an updated Magic Mouse and keyboard with something like the H2 chip that is used in AirPods and create peripherals that are connected to all your devices. Also, if you have a Magic Keyboard with Touch ID, the Touch ID won't work with the iPad, which is unfortunate. So in a nutshell, if you want to be able to switch between your iPad and Mac while using the same desk setup, you'll be better off with a multi-device peripherals like the Logitech MX Master Anywhere or MX Keys keyboard or something similar. I'll place few recommendations below as well as few monitor choices that might work great in an iPad setup. In terms of performance, the iPad in tandem with the monitor has come a long way. It's a much better experience than before, and I'm not sure if it's the M2 or iPad OS in general, but everything seems very natural and buttery smooth to the point where you might forget that you're using an iPad as a computer until you start using the setup for something more computerly-like. Starting from the very basic lock screen, things are a bit weird. For example, the iPad is locked and dark, while the display is vivid and bright, hinting ready to use. You can even move around the mouse up top and click sporadically without being able to do nothing until you hit space to enter iPad OS. See, everything is still very buggy, and there are plenty of components and elements that need to be tweaked out and polished over time. For example, if you intuitively press the keyboard button to adjust the brightness for the monitor, you'll be surprised to see that you're adjusting the iPad's brightness. If you go to the top right of the monitor where the clock is and press on to open Control Center, you'll see Control Center opening down on the iPad where the brightness is still adjusting the iPad's display. In fact, if you want to adjust the monitor's brightness, you'll have to go through Settings, Display and Brightness, and tweak it from there. And I'm not talking about Stage Manager yet. Initially, I thought I would use the iPad without Stage Manager while in extended monitor mode. That, however, is not an option at all. In fact, if you have a monitor plugged in, that monitor is automatically using Stage Manager, and the button in Control Center to turn it off and on is actually only applicable to the tablet. So Stage Manager is always on if you are in desk setup mode, or at least on the monitor itself. The toggle from Control Center works only on the iPad. Fortunately, there are a few settings that you can play with to adjust the setup to your workflow. The first thing that you can do is go to Display and Brightness, and in the respective device, adjust the display zoom. Think of this as your monitor scaling. Depending on your monitor size, the proper scaling can be very important. The next section in the settings worth playing with is under Home Screen and Multitasking and under Stage Manager. Here you can choose if you want to see the dock and recent apps on the left in relation to your monitor. For example, I prefer to keep my dock at the very bottom on the tablet while not having the same dock repeating on the larger display. Also, I prefer the iPad to avoid displaying recent apps because it's only 11 inches and there's not much real estate, while the monitor can do that easily. The layout that works best for me for now is having full screen apps on the iPad below while having windowed experience on the larger monitor above, where I choose what apps to drag in from the bottom. Here comes the interesting question. If you have an iPad connected to a monitor, can you use an external webcam? Well, in the case of the studio display, no. In fact, during my testing, I wasn't able to use any other third-party camera, whether it's connected directly to the iPad or to a monitor. So, side-mounted nose view is default for now. Another interesting observation in such setup is the larger display being nothing but an empty canvas. It's not an actual desktop like on the Mac, nor a second home screen like you might create and swipe to on the iPad. You can't drag icons or widgets in it. You can just place and move windows around. If I try to grab an icon from the home screen to place it on the larger desktop, it vanishes as if it's going to another multiverse. That automatically gives the dock the highest rank since it becomes the only component that can hold things that you might require on the display. Also, very important, keyboard shortcuts and behavior is very conflicting when using a desk setup with the iPad. The Magic Keyboard doesn't have an escape key, however, an external keyboard does, and I often hit escape unintentionally to get out of things like exiting a full screen image from files, for example, only to realize that it doesn't work. In certain situations, I can use the iPad with standard shortcuts very efficiently, like summoning Spotlight, but in others I'm reminded that I need to mouse as if I touch, if that makes sense. The iPad is a touch interface OS which wants to live in a cursor world. So can the iPad be used in a desk setup? At a glance, yes. Absolutely. There has never been a better time to use the iPad in a desk setup. It has all the potential and power to run pretty much any tasks you can think of. But even with proper monitor support and Stage Manager, it is still crippled by software limitations that you should be aware of. The truth is, I feel a lot more confident using it in my setup for managerial stuff or more casual work. But in terms of utilizing it to its full hardware potential or doing some more serious work, it's out of the question for now. There's a lot more to be desired, from simple workflow improvements to things like decent font support and, most of all, serious UI navigation and management improvement. There shouldn't be a learning curve for managing your Windows. If you just got your iPad, check out my latest video on how I set up a new iPad, and like and subscribe to the channel as well as my newsletter. And as always, it's been an absolute pleasure. This is Z, over and out.